The laundry basket slipped from my hands on the third-floor landing, sending an explosion of clean clothes tumbling down the concrete stairs like fabric confetti. White t-shirts, faded jeans, mismatched socks, and, God help me, underwear scattered across the grimy steps in a mortifying display of my entire wardrobe. The plastic basket bounced twice before coming to rest upside down on the second-floor landing, its hollow echo reverberating through the stairwell like a judgment. I stood there frozen for a moment, staring at the disaster I'd created. It was Tuesday evening, 6:23 p.m. according to the digital clock on my phone, and I'd been coming back from the laundromat in the building's basement, a dreary, fluorescent-lit cave where ancient washing machines wheezed and groaned through their cycles while residents avoided eye contact and pretended to read magazines that had been there since the Clinton administration. The apartment building was one of those mid-century concrete monuments to architectural pragmatism, all sharp angles and unforgiving surfaces, built sometime in the 1960s when developers apparently believed that human beings thrived in environments resembling parking garages. The stairwells smelled perpetually of industrial disinfectant and something vaguely organic that might have been decay, or might have been whatever Mrs. Chen from 2B cooked every evening at precisely 5:30. I lived on the fourth floor in apartment 4E, a one-bedroom unit that cost too much and offered too little, but it was mine, the first place I'd ever lived alone, without roommates or family members or anyone else's expectations cluttering the space. At 28, I'd finally achieved the solitude I'd convinced myself I wanted, though lately it felt more like isolation than independence. The building housed the kind of residents who had learned to perfect the art of polite invisibility. We passed each other in hallways with carefully neutral expressions, shared elevators in silence broken only by the mechanical announcement of floors, and lived our separate lives with the dedication of monks who had taken vows of social distancing. In the 2 years I'd lived here, I could count my interactions with neighbors on one hand, and most of those had been limited to "excuse me" and "sorry." But now, as I stared at my underwear draped across the stairs like flags of surrender, I realized my carefully maintained anonymity was about to be shattered. The sound of a door opening echoed from above, followed by footsteps on the stairs. Slow, measured footsteps that suggested someone who moved with deliberate care rather than hurried efficiency. I scrambled to gather the closest items: a pair of jeans, a few socks, a t-shirt that had somehow made it to the first-floor landing, but there was too much scattered too far, and the footsteps were getting closer. "Oh," came a voice from above me, surprised but not unkind. "That looks like quite the situation." I looked up to see a man standing on the landing between the third and fourth floors, surveying the textile chaos with what appeared to be gentle amusement rather than annoyance. He was older than me, mid-40s maybe, with the kind of understated handsomeness that came from good bone structure and careful grooming rather than youth. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and he wore a simple gray sweater and dark jeans that suggested someone who thought about his appearance without being vain about it. I recognized him as the resident of 4F, the apartment at the end of my hallway. In 2 years of living 6 doors apart, we'd achieved the perfect choreography of avoidance. I'd glimpsed him disappearing around corners, heard his door close just as I was fumbling with my keys, caught the occasional whiff of coffee and something that might have been expensive cologne in the hallway after he'd passed through. He was attractive in the way that made me uncomfortable, the way that made me aware of things about myself I preferred not to examine too closely. There had been moments, standing in line at the mailboxes, waiting for the elevator, when I'd felt his presence like a warm weight in my peripheral vision and had to concentrate on keeping my eyes fixed straight ahead. "I'm sorry," I said, heat rising in my cheeks as I gestured helplessly at the scattered laundry. "I lost my grip on the basket. I'll clean this up right away." "No need to apologize," he said, starting down the stairs toward me. "Gravity can be unforgiving." His voice was exactly what I'd expected. Cultured, warm, with the kind of careful diction that suggested education and maybe a hint of an accent I couldn't quite place. As he got closer, I caught that scent again. Coffee and cedar and something clean that made me want to lean in closer. "Here," he said, reaching for a button-down shirt that had draped itself across the railing like it was posing for a laundry commercial. "Let me help." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said, pausing to look at me directly for what might have been the first time ever. His eyes were a warm brown, the color of good coffee or expensive chocolate, and they held mine for a moment longer than neighborly politeness required. "But I'd like to help, if you'll let me." There was something in the way he said it, not just the offer itself, but the acknowledgement that help required permission, that my autonomy mattered even in this moment of obvious need. It was such a small thing, but it hit me with unexpected force, the recognition that someone was actually seeing me rather than looking through me. "Okay," I said, my voice coming out softer than intended. "Thank you." We worked in surprisingly comfortable silence, gathering clothes and folding them with more care than they probably deserved. I watched him handle my laundry, intimate things, worn t-shirts and faded underwear, with the same careful attention he might have given to museum pieces. There was something both humbling and strangely intimate about it, watching this beautiful, careful man tend to the mundane details of my life. "I'm David, by the way," he said, as we climbed back toward the 4th floor, my rescued laundry divided between us. 4F. "Alex," I replied, 4E. "I know," he said, then caught himself, color rising slightly in his cheeks. "I mean, I've seen your name on the mailbox." Not that I just noticed things. The admission hung between us as we reached the 4th floor landing, and I found myself studying his profile in the harsh overhead light. He was even more handsome up close, with the kind of face that belonged in European films about complicated men living complicated lives. There were fine lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter or worry or both, and a small scar near his left temple that made me want to know its story. "Would you like to come in?" I heard myself asking as we stood outside my apartment door. "I could make coffee." "As a thank you." The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. I wasn't the kind of person who invited neighbors in for coffee. I wasn't the kind of person who invited anyone in for anything. My apartment was my sanctuary, my refuge from a world that demanded too much social energy and too many careful performances. But something about David, about the way he'd helped without being asked, about the careful respect he'd shown for my belongings and my dignity, made me want to extend the evening, to see what might happen if we moved beyond the safe choreography of hallway encounters. "Are you sure?" David asked, and I could see him weighing the invitation, perhaps running through the same mental calculations I was, the risk of intimacy, the vulnerability of letting someone into carefully guarded space. "I'm sure," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. My apartment was exactly what you'd expect from someone who had learned to live small and careful. Functional furniture arranged with mathematical precision, books organized by genre and then by author, a kitchen so clean it looked like a museum exhibit. Everything in its place, every surface clear of clutter, the home of someone who had confused order with peace. "This is nice," David said, and I could tell he meant it. He moved through my living room with the careful attention of someone who understood that spaces reflected their inhabitants, that the way people arranged their belongings revealed things about their inner lives. "It's very organized," I said, which was both an apology and an explanation. "There's nothing wrong with knowing where things belong," David said, settling into one of my 2 identical chairs. "I admire people who can create order. My place tends toward organized chaos." I busied myself in the kitchen, grateful for something to do with my hands, while I processed the surreal fact that David from 4F was sitting in my living room. Making conversation like this was something we did regularly. The coffee maker was one of the few appliances I'd invested in, a sleek Italian machine that made coffee shop quality espresso and made me feel slightly more sophisticated than I actually was. "How do you take your coffee?" I called from the kitchen. However you're having it is fine. I made 2 cups of coffee with steamed milk, the kind of careful preparation that felt like a small performance of competence. When I returned to the living room, David was studying my bookshelf with the focused attention of someone who believed you could understand a person through their literary choices. "You read a lot of fiction," he observed as I handed him his coffee. "It's easier than reality sometimes," I said, then immediately regretted the admission. Too honest, too revealing for someone I barely knew. But David just nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I understand that completely, though I tend toward biography myself. Other people's real lives carefully curated and edited to make sense." "What do you do?" I asked, settling into the chair across from him. "For work, I mean." "I'm a graphic designer," David said. "Freelance, mostly. Corporate identity, marketing materials, the occasional book cover. It's solitary work, which suits me." "You work from home?" "Mostly, yes. Which means I spend a lot of time alone with coffee and deadlines and the occasional existential crisis about whether logo design constitutes meaningful contribution to society." Despite myself, I smiled. "And what's the verdict on that?" "Still pending," David said, and his answering smile transformed his entire face, softening the careful control and revealing someone warmer, more accessible than the polished exterior suggested. We drank our coffee and talked about safe things, work, books, the peculiarities of living in a building where the elevators made ominous grinding sounds and the heating system operated according to its own mysterious logic. But underneath the surface conversation, I was acutely aware of everything else. The way David held his coffee cup, the careful way he crossed his legs, the fact that he was sitting in my apartment like he belonged there. "Can I ask you something?" David said during a pause in the conversation. "Of course." "In the 2 years we've been neighbors, I don't think I've ever seen you with anyone. Friends, family, dates. Not that I'm keeping track," he added quickly, "but in a building this size, you notice patterns." The observation hit closer to home than I was comfortable with. It was true, of course. My social life existed primarily in my imagination, and in the carefully curated online personas I maintained but rarely updated. I had work acquaintances who invited me to happy hours I never attended, college friends who had moved on to marriages and mortgages, and birthday parties I found excuses to miss. "I'm not very social," I said, which was both true and completely inadequate. "Neither am I," David said quietly. "But sometimes I wonder if there's a difference between choosing solitude and just defaulting to it." The words hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to examine. There was something in his voice, not quite sadness, but a kind of recognition, as if he saw something in me that mirrored his own experience. "What about you?" I asked. "I've never seen you with anyone either." David was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for complex problems. "I was married," he said finally. "For 8 years. It ended about 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was necessary. We wanted different things, became different people. Sometimes love isn't enough to bridge that kind of distance." There was pain in his voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. I found myself wanting to know more. What had gone wrong? What kind of person he'd been married to? What had made him choose this careful solitude over trying again? But I also recognized the walls he'd constructed around the topic. "Is that why you moved here?" I asked instead. "Partly. After the divorce, I needed somewhere neutral, somewhere that didn't have history attached to every corner." He paused, meeting my eyes. "What about you? What brought you to our charming concrete palace?" "Graduate school," I said. "I was getting my master's in library science at the university. The building was close to campus and cheap enough for a student budget." "Was? You finished? 2 years ago?" "I work at the university library now. Reference desk, mostly. helping students find sources for papers they should have started weeks earlier. Do you like it? The question was simple, but it hit something deep. Did I like it? I was good at it, certainly. I had the temperament for research, the patience for dealing with stressed students, the organizational skills that library work required. But liking it felt like a luxury I'd never considered. I like helping people find what they're looking for, I said carefully. That's not the same thing as liking your job. No, I admitted. I suppose it's not. David leaned forward slightly, his attention focused on me with an intensity that made me feel simultaneously visible and vulnerable. What would you do if you could do anything? I don't know, I said, which was both true and terrifying. At 28, shouldn't I have some idea of what I wanted from life beyond the basic maintenance of existence? That's honest, David said. Most people have elaborate fantasies they're too afraid to pursue. There's something refreshing about admitting you don't know. Is there? Because it mostly feels like failure. Why failure? The question caught me off guard. Why did my uncertainty feel like failure? Because everyone else seemed to have figured it out? Because I was supposed to have a 5-year plan and a clear sense of purpose? Because admitting confusion felt like admitting weakness? I don't know that either, I said, which made David smile. You're very honest, he said. It's unusual. What do you mean? Most people perform their lives rather than living them. They have rehearsed answers for questions like, what do you want and are you happy? Because the real answers are too complicated or too frightening. I studied his face, noting the way his expression had grown more serious, more thoughtful. And what's your real answer to those questions? David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing honesty against self-protection. I want to matter, he said finally. I want to create something beautiful that outlasts me, and I want to stop feeling like I'm watching life happen to other people. The admission hung between us, raw and immediate. I felt something shift in my chest, a recognition of shared longing that made the air feel thinner, more charged. And are you happy? I asked quietly. I was resigned, David said. I thought that was close enough. But lately... He paused, his eyes meeting mine. Lately I've been wondering if resignation is just another word for giving up. The coffee had grown cold in our cups, forgotten as the conversation moved into territory neither of us had expected to explore. The late afternoon light filtering through my windows had shifted, casting longer shadows that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. Can I tell you something? I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Please. I think about you sometimes. I mean, I notice you. In the hallway, at the mailboxes. I've wondered what your life is like, what you do in the evenings, whether you're happy. The admission felt enormous, dangerous in a way that made my pulse quicken. I'd revealed something I'd barely admitted to myself, let alone to the object of those fleeting thoughts. David's expression shifted, something warming in his eyes that made me feel simultaneously exposed and safe. I notice you too, he said quietly. More than I should, probably. There's something about the way you move through the world, careful, observant, like you're seeing things other people miss. I don't think that's true. It is true. You helped Mrs. Patterson with her groceries last month when she was struggling with her walker. I saw you through the window. You didn't know anyone was watching, and you stayed until she was safely inside her apartment. I remembered the incident. Mrs. Patterson from 2C, struggling with paper bags and a walker that seemed determined to roll away from her. It had been a simple thing, helping her get her groceries upstairs, but David had noticed. David had been watching. You were watching? I asked. I watch a lot of things, David said, and there was something in his voice that made me look at him more carefully. It's a hazard of working alone. You start paying attention to patterns, to the small dramas playing out around you. What patterns have you noticed about me? The question slipped out before I could consider whether I really wanted to know the answer. But David didn't seem surprised by it, as if he'd been waiting for me to ask. "You leave for work at exactly 8:15 every morning," he said. "You take the stairs instead of the elevator unless you're carrying something heavy. You get your mail at odd times like you're trying to avoid running into other people. And you play music sometimes in the evenings. Classical, I think, but quiet enough that it's more suggestion than sound." The accuracy of his observations was both thrilling and terrifying. He'd been paying attention, real attention, to the mundane details of my daily existence. No one had ever done that before, had ever cared enough to notice my habits, my rhythms, the small choices that made up a life. "That's very observant," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is it creepy?" "I don't mean it to be creepy." "It's not creepy," I said, and realized I meant it. "It's nice. To be seen." The words hung between us, loaded with more meaning than they could safely carry. To be seen. Such a simple thing, such a fundamental human need, but something I'd convinced myself I could live without. "Alex," David said, and my name in his voice sounded different than it had in anyone else's, weighted with something I couldn't quite identify, but that made my chest feel tight. "Yes?" "I'm glad your laundry basket fell apart. Despite everything, the vulnerability, the uncertainty, the way this conversation had veered into territory I'd spent years avoiding, I laughed. Actually laughed, surprised by the sound of my own voice expressing something like joy. "That's a strange thing to be grateful for," I said. "Maybe. But it gave us an excuse to have this conversation. And I've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time." "Have you? Haven't you?" The question was gentle but direct, and I could see David watching my face, waiting for an answer that would either open a door or close it permanently. "Yes," I said quietly. "I have." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. David's expression shifted, something softening in his features that made him look younger, more hopeful. "So what now?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "I'm not very good at this." "At what?" "Connecting with people, letting them in." Trust David leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, closing the distance between us without actually moving closer. "Neither am I," he said. "I spent 8 years married to someone and never learned how to actually be intimate with them. I'm probably the worst person to figure this out with. Maybe that makes us even. Maybe it does." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens between people who have found themselves saying true things, who have discovered that honesty doesn't always lead to disaster. I found myself studying David's face in the changing light, memorizing details I'd only glimpsed before. The way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the small lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the careful way he held himself as if he were always prepared for disappointment. "What are you thinking about?" David asked. "You," I said, too honestly. "I'm thinking about you." "What about me?" "How you're different than I expected." "How so?" I considered the question, trying to articulate something I was only beginning to understand myself. "You seem lonely," I said finally. "But not bitter about it. Like you've made peace with solitude without giving up on the possibility of something else." David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing my words against his own self-understanding. "I think," he said slowly, "I convinced myself that wanting connection was a weakness, that needing other people made you vulnerable in ways that weren't sustainable. And now? Now I'm sitting in your apartment having the most honest conversation I've had in years, and I'm remembering why vulnerability might be worth the risk." The words hit me like a physical thing, warm and immediate. I felt something shift in the space between us, some fundamental change in the quality of attention we were paying to each other. "David," I said, his name feeling significant on my tongue. Yes? I'm scared. Of what? Of wanting this too much, of screwing it up, of discovering that I'm too damaged or too closed off or too whatever to actually connect with another person. David reached across the space between our chairs, his hand finding mine where it rested on the arm of my chair. The contact was electric, sending warmth up my arm and into my chest in a way that made me understand suddenly what people meant when they talked about chemistry. Alex, he said, his thumb tracing across my knuckles in a gesture so gentle it made my throat tight. Look at me. I did, meeting those warm brown eyes that held mine with steady kindness. You're not too anything, he said. You're just you. And that's enough. More than enough. I stared at him, at this beautiful, careful man who had somehow seen past all my defenses to something worth knowing. His hand was warm on mine, solid and real in a way that made the carefully constructed walls of my apartment feel suddenly permeable. I don't know how to do this, I whispered. Neither do I, David said. But maybe we can figure it out together. The suggestion hung between us, fragile and full of possibility. Together. Such a simple word, but one that contained multitudes. Shared risk, mutual vulnerability, the terrifying prospect of mattering to another person. I looked down at our joined hands, at the way his fingers had laced through mine like they belonged there. Such a small thing, holding hands with someone, but it felt revolutionary, like I was discovering a new way to exist in the world. I should probably go, David said, but he made no move to pull his hand away from mine. Should you? It's getting late. And this feels... He paused, searching for words. Important. I don't want to rush it. I understood what he meant. Whatever was happening between us felt too significant to hurry, too precious to risk by moving too fast or pushing too hard. But I also didn't want him to leave, didn't want to return to the careful solitude that had felt like safety until this evening revealed it for what it really was. Just another form of hiding. You don't have to go yet, I heard myself saying, the words echoing something from earlier but carrying new weight now. If you don't want to. David's eyes met mine, and I could see him weighing the invitation, considering all the ways this evening could change everything between us. The silence stretched between us, heavy with possibility and fear in equal measure. My lonely older neighbor changed my life forever. Gay Story. Part 2. The Space Between Heartbeats. The fluorescent light flickered once, twice, then steadied, casting us both in clear, unwavering light. I stood frozen in the hallway, key in my hand, caught between the safety of my own space and the terrifying prospect of staying. Marcus waited in his doorway, patient as always, while I wrestled with desire and fear and the sudden overwhelming certainty that whatever happened next would change everything. You don't have to go yet. If you don't want to. The words echoed in the narrow space between us, weighted with invitation and hope, and the kind of vulnerability that made my chest ache. I looked at him, really looked, taking in the way he held himself carefully in the doorway, as if prepared for rejection but hoping for something else entirely. The word came out as barely a whisper. My throat felt tight, constricted by the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just another hour of conversation, but the possibility of something real, something that might matter beyond this strange evening. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance, and I noticed for the first time the sound of rain beginning to tap against the hallway window. The weather seemed to be conspiring with this moment, creating reasons to stay inside, to remain in the warm glow of his apartment rather than retreat to the familiar emptiness of my own. I don't want to go, I said finally, the admission surprising me with its honesty. Relief flickered across Marcus's features, followed quickly by something that might have been joy. He stepped back from the doorway, creating space for me to enter, and I found myself moving toward him before I could overthink the decision. The key in my hand suddenly felt foreign, a symbol of the separate life I'd been planning to return to just moments ago. I looked down at it, then back at Marcus, who was watching me with those patient brown eyes. "I'm scared," I heard myself say. "Of what?" The question was gentle, without judgment, and it made me want to be truthful even though honesty felt dangerous. "Of this. Of you. Of wanting something real for the first time in—" I paused, trying to remember. God, I don't know how long. Marcus nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I'm scared too." "Really?" "Terrified. It's been a very long time since I've asked someone to stay. Even longer since someone said yes. There was something reassuring about his fear matching mine, about neither of us pretending to be confident in territory we'd both avoided for so long. I slipped my key back into my pocket and stepped across the threshold into his apartment. Marcus closed the door behind me with a soft click, and suddenly we were sealed away from the world outside, from the careful routines and protective solitude that had defined both our lives. We stood facing each other in his living room, the easy intimacy of our earlier conversation replaced by an awkwardness that felt almost adolescent. The rain was picking up outside, drumming against the windows with increasing intensity, and the sound seemed to emphasize how alone we were together. "I could make tea," Marcus offered, though his coffee maker was clearly visible and we both knew neither of us needed more caffeine at this hour. "That sounds nice." But neither of us moved. We remained frozen in place, caught between the connection we'd discovered and the uncertainty of how to nurture it without breaking it. I watched Marcus run a hand through his graying hair, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a nervous habit. The movement made his sweater ride up slightly, revealing a strip of skin that made my breath catch for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely. "Daniel," he said softly. "Yeah? Are we making a mistake?" The question hung in the air between us, honest and terrifying. Were we? Two lonely people finding comfort in each other's company? Was that healing or just postponing inevitable disappointment? "I don't know," I said, "but I think I'd rather make a mistake than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I was brave enough to find out." Something shifted in Marcus's expression at my words. The careful guardedness I'd sensed in him began to soften, replaced by something warmer and more open. "When was the last time you were brave about something that mattered?" he asked. I considered the question seriously. When had I last taken a real risk, one that involved my heart rather than just my career or finances? I honestly can't remember. What about you? Moving here, maybe. Leaving everything familiar and starting over in a city where I didn't know anyone. Marcus moved toward the kitchen, but slowly, as if reluctant to put distance between us. Though I'm not sure that was brave so much as desperate. Sometimes they're the same thing. I followed him to the small kitchen area, standing close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something that was purely him. He filled the kettle with careful precision, his movements deliberate in a way that suggested he was thinking about more than just making tea. "What were you desperate to escape from?" I asked. Marcus paused, kettle in hand, and I saw something flicker across his face. Pain, maybe, or the kind of weariness that comes from carrying secrets for too long. Myself, I think. The person I'd become in my last relationship in my old life. I'd gotten so small, so careful about taking up space or having opinions or wanting anything. He set the kettle on the stove and turned to face me. David had very definite ideas about who I should be, and somewhere along the way I stopped fighting him about it. The name hit me like a physical blow, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe because it made the relationship real in a way that pronouns and careful phrasing hadn't. There had been someone specific who had made Marcus doubt his own worth, someone who had convinced him he was too much or not enough, or fundamentally unlovable. How long were you together? I asked.
8 years.
We met in graduate school, moved in together after 6 months. I thought we were building something permanent. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turns out permanence and happiness aren't the same thing. The kettle began to whistle, and Marcus turned to tend to it, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself carefully upright as if bracing against old wounds. What happened? I asked gently. Marcus poured hot water over tea bags, the steam rising between us like a barrier he could hide behind if needed. Nothing dramatic. No cheating or fighting or grand betrayals. Just erosion. Gradual disappearance of everything that had made us work in the beginning. He handed me a mug, our fingers brushing in the exchange. By the end, we were like roommates who barely tolerated each other. Polite strangers sharing the same space. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, using the heat to steady myself against the rawness in his voice. That sounds worse than a dramatic ending, honestly. At least with fighting, you know the other person still cares enough to feel something. Exactly. Marcus looked at me with surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to understand. The indifference was the worst part. When he finally left, he said it was like living alone except with someone else's mess to clean up. The cruelty of it took my breath away. I found myself moving closer to Marcus without consciously deciding to, drawn by an instinct to offer comfort even though I had no idea how. That says nothing about you and everything about his capacity for cruelty, I said firmly. Does it? Sometimes I wonder if he was right, if I'd become someone boring and forgettable, someone easy to overlook. The self-doubt in his voice made my chest ache. How could someone as thoughtful and interesting as Marcus believe such things about himself? You're not forgettable, I said. You're the opposite of forgettable. Marcus looked at me over his tea mug, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. How can you be so sure? You've known me for 3 hours. Because in 3 hours you've made me feel more seen and understood than I have in years. Because you helped me clean up tomato sauce without making me feel stupid about it. Because you play piano at night when you think no one is listening. And it's the most beautiful thing I've heard in months. I paused, surprised by my own intensity. And because right now, looking at you, I can't imagine how anyone could share space with you and not fall a little bit in love with who you are. The words hung between us, more honest than I'd intended to be. Marcus set down his tea mug with unsteady hands, and I realized I might have said too much, pushed too hard into territory we weren't ready to navigate. Daniel, he said softly, I'm sorry. That was too much. Too fast. I shouldn't have... No. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. Don't apologize for seeing me. It's been so long since someone looked at me like I was worth seeing. The rain outside had intensified, creating a steady rhythm against the windows that seemed to cocoon us in intimate warmth. Lightning flickered somewhere in the distance, followed by another roll of thunder, and I found myself grateful for the storm that made staying feel inevitable rather than chosen. What about you? Marcus asked. What made you so afraid of being known? The question hit deeper than I'd expected. I took a sip of tea, buying time to think about how much truth I was ready to share. I think I learned early that needing things from other people was dangerous, I said slowly. My parents weren't cruel, just busy, distracted. I figured out that the easiest way to get by was to not need anything from anyone. Marcus nodded as if this made perfect sense, and I realized he probably understood the particular kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who love you in theory, but don't have the bandwidth to see you in practice. How old were you when you figured that out? 8, maybe 9. My mom was working on her master's degree while my dad was traveling for work constantly. I learned to pack my own lunches, do my own homework, handle problems without bothering them. I paused, remembering the careful self-sufficiency I'd cultivated like armor. By the time they had more time to give, I'd already decided I didn't need it. And that carried forward into your relationships? Every single one. I'd present this polished, low-maintenance version of myself and wonder why people eventually got bored. Turns out nobody wants to fall in love with someone who doesn't seem to need them for anything. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I worried I'd revealed too much, made myself sound damaged in a way that would send him running. "Can I tell you something?" he said finally. "Of course." "Right now, in this moment, you don't seem low maintenance at all. You seem like someone with depth and complexity and feelings worth exploring. Someone who might actually need things from another person, even if you're out of practice asking for them." The observation was so gentle and so accurate that it made my eyes burn. I set down my tea mug and looked away, overwhelmed by being seen so clearly. "Hey," Marcus said softly. "That's not a bad thing. Needing people, I mean. It's just human. It doesn't feel human. It feels terrifying." "What feels terrifying about it?" I forced myself to meet his eyes again, to stay present even though every instinct screamed at me to retreat into familiar distance. "The possibility that I might need you specifically, that this might become something I can't walk away from without it hurting." The admission hung in the air between us, raw and honest and completely unprotected. Marcus studied my face with those patient brown eyes, and I saw something shift in his expression. "Daniel," he said quietly. "Yeah? What if it's supposed to hurt a little? What if that's how you know it matters?" The question rewrote something fundamental in my understanding of emotional risk. I'd spent so long trying to avoid hurt that I'd forgotten it might be the price of admission for anything worthwhile. "I don't know how to do this," I said. "Be close to someone. Let them be close to me. I'm probably going to mess it up. Join the club. I haven't exactly been winning at human connection lately either." Something about his dry honesty made me smile despite the weight of the conversation. Here we were, two people equally terrified of intimacy, somehow finding courage in shared incompetence. "Maybe we can figure it out together," I said. "Maybe we can." Marcus moved then, closing the small distance between us until we were standing close enough to touch. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the careful rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Anything." "When was the last time someone held you? Really held you? Not just during sex or as a prelude to something else, but just because you mattered to them." The question hit me like a physical blow. When had someone last held me for the simple pleasure of holding me? I tried to remember and came up empty. "I don't think anyone ever has," I said quietly. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, surprise maybe, or recognition of a loneliness that matched his own. "Would you like that? To be held, I mean. No agenda, no expectations, just comfort." The offer was so gentle, so free of pressure, that it made my throat tight. I nodded, not trusting my voice to work properly. Marcus moved to the couch and settled into one corner, then opened his arms in invitation. I stood frozen for a moment, suddenly aware of how significant this was, how crossing this line would change things between us in ways I couldn't predict or control. But the alternative, walking away, returning to my empty apartment and my careful solitude, felt impossible now. I moved toward the couch and settled against Marcus's side, letting myself lean into his warmth for the first time. His arms came around me naturally, and I was struck by how perfectly I seemed to fit against him. One hand settled on my back, moving in slow, soothing circles, while the other cradled my head against his chest. I could hear his heartbeat, steady and reassuring, and smell that subtle cologne that was becoming familiar and comforting. "Is this okay?" he murmured against my hair. "It's perfect." And it was. This wasn't sexual or desperate or demanding. It was pure comfort, the kind of holding I'd craved without knowing I craved it. I felt my body relax against his in increments. Muscles I hadn't realized were tense finally loosening. "You smell good," I said softly, then immediately felt heat creep up my neck at the admission. Marcus chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest where my ear was pressed. "Thank you. You smell like rain and something that's uniquely you." "What does that smell like?" "Possibility." The word settled into my chest like a warmth I wanted to curl around. When was the last time someone had associated me with possibility rather than safety or convenience? We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain against the windows and the steady rhythm of each other's breathing. I found myself studying the details I could see from this angle, the way his sweater was soft and worn, how his hand moved in absent patterns against my back, the careful way he held me like I was something precious. "Marcus? Thank you for this. For seeing that I needed it even when I couldn't ask for it. Thank you for letting me give it. I needed this too, more than I realized." I lifted my head to look at him, taking in the soft expression on his face, the way the lamplight caught the silver in his hair. He was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional attractiveness and everything to do with the quality of attention he brought to this moment. "How long has it been since someone held you?" I asked. "Too long. Even when David and I were together, physical affection became perfunctory toward the end, something we did out of habit rather than desire." His hand continued its gentle movement against my back. I'd forgotten how good it felt to touch someone who actually wanted to be touched. I want to be touched. By you, I mean. The admission came out more breathless than I'd intended, and I felt heat flood my face. Marcus's hand stilled for a moment, and I worried I'd misread the situation, pushed into territory he wasn't ready for. But when I looked up at him, his eyes were dark with something that might have been desire. "Daniel," he said softly. "Yeah?" "I want to touch you too. But I need you to know that this isn't casual for me. I know we just met. I know this is all happening fast. But this feels like something I've been waiting for without knowing I was waiting." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if we do this, whatever this becomes, I'm not going to be able to pretend it doesn't matter. I'm not good at casual anymore, if I ever was." The honesty was both thrilling and terrifying. He was right that this was happening fast, but it didn't feel fast. It felt like recognition, like finding something I'd been searching for my entire adult life. "I don't want casual either," I said. "I want this to matter. I want you to matter." Relief flooded his features, followed by something that looked like joy. "Good," he said simply, "because you already matter to me more than I know how to handle." The admission made my breath catch. I found myself studying his face in the soft light, memorizing the way he looked in this moment, open and vulnerable and absolutely present. "Can I kiss you?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, surprising us both. "I was hoping you'd ask." Marcus cupped my face in his hands with infinite gentleness, thumbs tracing my cheekbones as he leaned closer. Our lips met softly, tentatively, a question asked and answered in the space of a heartbeat. The kiss was nothing like the desperate, hungry connections I'd known before. This was patient and exploring, two people learning the shape of each other's desire with careful reverence. Marcus kissed, like he did everything else, with complete attention, every nuance deliberate and weighted with meaning. I felt myself melting against him, my hands finding their way to his chest, then sliding up to tangle in his hair. He was warm and solid and real beneath my touch, and I marveled at the simple permission to explore, to claim this intimacy. When we finally broke apart, we stayed close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. "God," Marcus breathed. "Good God or bad God?" "Very, very good God." He smiled, and I felt the expression against my lips. I can't remember the last time a kiss felt like that. Like what? Like coming home to something I didn't know I'd been missing. The poetry of it made my chest tight with emotion I didn't have names for. How had I found him? How had 18 months of parallel loneliness led to this moment, this perfect recognition of two hearts that had been waiting for each other? "Marcus," I said softly. "Yeah? I think I'm falling for you." Fast and hard and completely outside my control. The words scared me even as they left my mouth, but they were true. This wasn't just attraction or loneliness-seeking comfort. This was something deeper and more dangerous and absolutely necessary. "Thank God," Marcus said fervently. I was starting to worry I was the only one losing my mind here. I laughed, giddy with relief and possibility. "So we're both losing our minds." "Spectacularly." He kissed me again, deeper this time, with more confidence and heat. I responded without thinking, my body pressing closer to his as if trying to eliminate any space between us. His hands tangled in my hair, holding me exactly where he wanted me, and I gave myself over to the sensation completely. When we broke apart this time, we were both breathing hard, and I could see something had shifted in the way Marcus was looking at me. The careful control he'd maintained all evening was fraying at the edges, replaced by naked want. "Daniel," he said, voice rough. "I know. This is moving fast. I know that too. Are you okay with that?" I considered the question seriously. Was I okay with the intensity of what was happening between us? With the way every careful boundary I'd built around my heart was crumbling under the weight of his attention? "I'm terrified and exhilarated and more alive than I've felt in years," I said honestly. "So yes, I'm okay with it." Marcus smiled, that full, unreserved smile that transformed his entire face. "In that case." He shifted on the couch, pulling me more fully against him until I was practically in his lap. The new position brought us even closer together, close enough that I could feel the steady beat of his heart against my chest. "Is this okay?" he asked. Instead of answering with words, I leaned down and kissed him again, pouring everything I couldn't articulate into the connection of our mouths. He responded immediately, one hand cradling the back of my head while the other splayed across my back, holding me against him. Time seemed to slow and stretch around us. The rain outside created a steady percussion that made the rest of the world feel very far away. Here in this warm, lamp-lit space, wrapped in each other's arms, nothing existed except the careful exploration of touch and taste and the growing certainty that this was exactly where I was supposed to be. "Daniel," Marcus murmured against my lips. "I need to tell you something." I pulled back slightly to meet his eyes, noting the serious expression that had replaced the heat from moments before. "What is it?" "I'm falling too. Harder and faster than I thought was possible at my age." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "And it scares the hell out of me because I can't survive having my heart broken again. Not like before." The vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache. I could see the fear in his eyes, the war between desire and self-preservation that I recognized all too well. "Then don't let me break it," I said softly. "Can you promise me that?" The question hung between us, honest and impossible. Could I promise not to hurt him? Could anyone make such a guarantee about something as unpredictable as love? "I can promise to try. I can promise that hurting you is the last thing I want to do." I traced my finger along his jawline, marveling at the permission to touch him so intimately. "But mostly I can promise that this matters to me. You matter to me. Whatever this becomes, it won't be casual or careless or something I can walk away from without it changing me." Marcus studied my face for a long moment, as if looking for cracks in my sincerity. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he pulled me down for another kiss, this one deeper and more desperate than the others. We lost ourselves in the exploration of each other, hands mapping new territory while mouths learned the language of shared desire. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows with increasing fury, but it only made our shelter feel more precious, more removed from the ordinary world. At some point, we shifted positions again, lying down on the couch with Marcus's back against the cushions and me curled against his side. My head found its natural resting place on his chest, and his arms encircled me with protective tenderness. "This feels dangerous," I murmured against his sweater. "What part?" "How right it feels." "How easy." I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong. Marcus's hand stroked through my hair with soothing repetition. What if nothing goes wrong? What if this is just what it feels like when two people find each other at exactly the right moment? Is that what you think happened? We found each other? I think we stopped hiding from each other, and maybe from ourselves. The observation settled into my chest like truth I hadn't been ready to acknowledge. How long had I been hiding? How many years had I spent presenting careful versions of myself instead of risking genuine connection? Marcus? Yeah? I don't want to go back to hiding. Even if this gets complicated or scary or doesn't work out the way we hope, I don't want to go back to the person I was before tonight. Good, he said firmly, because I don't think I could bear watching you disappear into yourself again. Not now that I've seen who you really are. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something warm unfurl in my chest. When was the last time someone had cared enough about preserving the real me to notice if I started hiding again? We fell into comfortable silence, listening to the rain and the steady rhythm of each other's breathing. I felt myself relaxing completely for the first time in months, maybe years. The constant low-level anxiety that had become my baseline was gone, replaced by a sense of rightness so profound it was almost startling. Daniel? Are you falling asleep? I realized my eyelids were growing heavy, and my body was settling deeper into his embrace with each passing moment. Any other time, I would have fought the drowsiness, insisted on maintaining proper boundaries and appropriate timing. But wrapped in Marcus's arms with the rain creating a lullaby outside, sleep felt natural and safe. Is that okay? I asked. More than okay. I can't think of anything I'd rather do than hold you while you sleep. The simple statement made my heart skip. There was something so intimate about the idea of sleeping in someone's arms, of trusting them enough to be completely vulnerable and unguarded. Will you stay with me? On the couch, I mean. I know it's not very comfortable. Daniel, Marcus said softly. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. I smiled against his chest, feeling safer and more content than I had in years. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the windows, but inside we were warm and dry and utterly absorbed in each other. Marcus? Yeah? Thank you. For tonight, for this, for seeing me, for making me feel like someone worth staying for. His arms tightened around me almost imperceptibly. Thank you for staying. For taking the risk. For letting me see you. I was quiet for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had happened between us in the space of a single evening. From strangers who barely acknowledged each other to whatever this was, intimate and significant and full of possibility. What happens tomorrow? I asked softly. I don't know. We figure it out as we go, I suppose. Are you afraid? Marcus considered the question seriously. Terrified, but also more hopeful than I've been in years. Whatever comes next, tonight was worth it. You are worth it. The certainty in his voice made me feel brave in a way I hadn't experienced before. Maybe we didn't need to know what happened next. Maybe it was enough to know that we wanted to find out together. The rain outside began to soften, settling into a gentler rhythm that was more soothing than urgent. Lightning flickered less frequently, and the thunder grew more distant. The storm was passing, but neither of us made any move to separate or acknowledge the changing weather. "Daniel?" I was nearly asleep now, lulled by his warmth and the steady beat of his heart beneath my ear. Sweet dreams. I smiled and let myself sink fully into sleep, held safe in the arms of someone who had appeared in my life like an answer to a question I'd been afraid to ask. Tomorrow would bring decisions and complications and the messy reality of turning one perfect evening into something sustainable. But tonight, wrapped in Marcus's embrace while the last of the rain whispered against the windows, I allowed myself to believe that some things worth having were worth the risk of losing, that some connections were strong enough to survive the harsh light of day, that maybe, just maybe, I had found someone who would choose me again and again, morning after morning, for as long as we were brave enough to keep choosing each other. The last thing I was aware of before sleep claimed me completely was the gentle pressure of Marcus's lips against my hair and his whispered words, "I'm so glad you stayed." In the morning, there would be questions about what this all meant, concerns about moving too fast, the practical considerations of two lives becoming entangled. But in this moment, held safe against the steady rhythm of his breathing, all of that felt manageable. Whatever came next, we would face it together. No longer strangers, no longer alone, but something new and precious and full of promise. The rain continued its gentle song outside, blessing this fragile new beginning with the promise of growth and renewal, washing away the careful distance we had maintained for so long and leaving behind something clean and hopeful and infinitely worth protecting.